Hi, this is JJ Chandler. This is my video response for the ISTC 717 Module 1 Introduction to Distance Education. So the first part of this module asked us to provide a definition for distance education. My definition is distance education is the process of teachers and students sharing educational resources in either a synchronous or asynchronous fashion using technology. And there's several different elements that I borrowed from this week's reading to create that definition. The first is from the California Distance Learning Project, and that's just the use of technology. And they pointed out that distance education often embraces new and emerging technologies, and I agree with that. The second is from the International Journal of E-Learning and Distance Education article that talked about two-way communication. Now they talked about teacher to student, student to teacher communication. I would add student to student communication and collaboration when it comes to distance education. Some other defining elements, connecting learners to educational resources, and the idea that distance implies a geographical separation between teacher and student to student. I agree with all of those. The last was from the YouTube video, the idea of a higher degree of freedom being a part of distance education. I agree that's a nice benefit of distance education, but I don't believe it's a defining element, so I didn't include it in my definition. There were other elements in the readings this week that I actually disagreed with, and I thought I should outline them here. The first was the idea that teacher and student need to be separated in time, and I've engaged in enough distance education environments where we've done synchronous activities like chat that I just disagree with that point. And when you start integrating distance education systems into face-to-face courses, hybrid courses, blended courses, again, a lot's happening in real time, so I don't believe that's a good element for the definition. Second is the idea of student-controlled learning pace. We all have deadlines to meet, so I wouldn't say that we have absolute control over the pace of our learning. I would more agree with the YouTube perspective of having more academic freedom in how we approach learning in distance education. And finally, the International Journal of E-Learning and Distance Education article made a distinction between distance learning versus online learning. And I believe that's kind of an old distinction. Nowadays, I think we kind of use those two terms interchangeably, so I didn't include that in my definition. The second part of the module asks for our reaction to the current state of K-12 distance education. So the ERIC article, Funding and Policy Framework for Online Learning, mentioned several factors that are inhibiting the adoption and growth of distance education in the K-12 system. And I was shocked at first, but actually, given educational politics, they made a lot of sense. So the first growth inhibitor was system reach. If you're going to make a distance education system, is it going to be for local schools, a school district, an entire state, or even the nation? And given the scale of the system, that impacts a lot of other things like operational control. Who controls the content? Who controls the assessments? Would that be local teachers, a consortium of educators, external experts, state school boards, a national board of education? And finally, money. Financial concerns are always a factor. Who's going to pay these teachers? If a teacher in one district is teaching students in multiple districts, where does their paycheck come from? And who gets to count those students when it comes to future funding, when it comes to assessing the school's academic performance? So all of these are growth inhibitors to the distance education being adopted in the K-12 system. The third part of the module was what I think the future of distance education in K-12 is. I think it needs to be moving inward from the edges of the student population. And the reason that I believe that is, again, the ERIC article, Funding and Policy Framework for Online Learning, said that a lot of distance education is driven by students on the fringe. These are at-risk students, low-income, homeless students, as well as students who have performed poorly academically and need help with credit recovery. That's sort of one end of the spectrum. The other end is honor students, gifted and talented students, as well as students in AP courses preparing to take AP tests. So I believe the distance education in K-12 needs to start moving inward from the edges of the student population to serve more students. The references I used to put this video together are listed here. That completes my Module 1. I look forward to seeing you all online soon.